Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches. And today we're going to be talking about, The Spirit from 2008. A movie that, I saw at the cinema. Um, and then again, bought on DVD, specifically after it came up multiple times in a discussion about what is the worst superhero movie ever made. So that's just a hint about what we're getting into here. Okay, so what is the Spirit about? Well, the Spirit himself is a masked crime fighter who protects the kind of ambiguously identified city, the city. It's one of those, places that's just the city, from the criminals who would corrupt or conquer it. Chief among his antagonists, at least as far as this movie is concerned, is the Octopus, who is, again, as far as this movie is concerned, a sociopathic lunatic who delights in the mayhem he wreaks. The movie's plot involves the Octopus and the Spirit colliding over a mystical artifact, a clash that is complicated by the fact that the artifact is also being sought by the Spirit's former flame, the international thief Sans Serif. So that's the plot. What is there to talk about with this movie? Well, as I mentioned, it was discussed, multiple times in a conversation about the worst superhero movie ever. It was a critical and commercial flop, and it deserved to be. So let's talk about what went wrong, other than everything, because that would be a very short video. Accurate, but a very short video. Okay, so first of all, property wrongs. So there's a double meaning here. So first of all, let's talk about Will Eisner. Will Eisner is the creator of the Spirit. He's one of the most celebrated names in comic book history. He was basically the man who defined how we use sequential art to tell stories in a very real way. If you've read any comic book, you've read Eisner's work, because that comic book is almost certainly drawing on the work he did to understand how to tell a story. So we're talking about a man who is a massive figure in the comic book world. And The Spirit was one of his most successful works. It was created in 1940, it ran in newspapers for over 10 years, and it's been regularly revived in comic book form every decade since then, most recently in 2017. So it's a name that has a lot of cachet in comic book circles, but if you're not a comic book fan, you probably haven't heard of it. So it's not a film that can trade on public name recognition. You're not going to have a whole bunch of people going, "Oh, The Spirit," in the way that you would Batman, and therefore, the film could trade on public name recognition. Like it's a license or a property that doesn't deliver value in and of itself as a public kind of awareness thing. So to me, it's the wrong property to be licensing for a big budget action movie. Then on the flip side, we get the wrong that is being done to the property. Because, oh boy, not only do we make a movie that is really only going to be exciting in concept to a small number of people, but then we made a movie that those people are going to loathe. So the issue here is that Frank Miller, who had written the Sin City comic books and who had been credited as co-director of the Sin City movie that came out in 2005, that film had been a big success. And Miller was tapped to write and direct this. And what we therefore get is a film that skews very heavily towards Frank Miller's Sin City's aesthetic and style, which is very different from that of Eisner. And also, and this is an important part, at a time when Miller's own Sin City work had become a clumsy, artificial caricature of itself. Really tired, vapid, repetitive. And so we basically get, Miller trying to turn a property that is not Sin City into Sin City at a time when even Sin City is not very good anymore. It's just wrong on every respect. Miller is a problem in more than one way, though, because then we get to the question of direction. So as I mentioned, Miller had been credited as the co-director on the Sin City film. The other co-director credited is the very talented Robert Rodriguez. This film, The Spirit, is Miller's first and only time directing alone. And if it tells us anything, it's who to be grateful for everything good that came out of Sin City. And it's Robert Rodriguez. first, let's talk performance, shall we? I think, performance is the big issue here. Like the movie's got a particular visual style. It executes that style fine, I guess. It's the wrong style, but, because it's just Sin City style. But let's talk performance, because Miller takes a fine cast and gets nothing out of any of them. I mean, like, I kind of love Samuel L. Jackson and Scarlett Johansson in this movie, because that, to me, is because they've worked out very, very early on that this is nonsense. Jackson, because they're similar names and I'm going to confuse them. Samuel L. Jackson, basically embraces this by overacting as only he and a very select number of other people, including Brian Blessed, can do. I mean, there are people out there who can chew scenery at a level few people can. Samuel L. Jackson is one of them, and he goes the full ham in here. He buys extra ham. He ships in truckloads of ham. Scarlett Johansson, on the other hand, takes completely the opposite track. She deadpans like the deadpanniest deadpanner who ever panned dead. There is like not a flicker of anything from her except completely stoic deadpan one-liners. Unfortunately, Jackson is the antagonist, Johansson is his sidekick. The film is going to spend a lot more time with Gabriel Markt as the spirit himself, and Eva Mendes as Sans Serif, his former love interest. The problem here is that they're terrible, and I don't blame them for this, because they have been perfectly fine in multiple other roles. Whatever they were being told to do, it doesn't work. There's no sense of connection between the two characters. There's no sense of passion between them. There's a 2-minute flashback sequence involving other actors where we get twice the chemistry than we get from the whole rest of the movie from the main two. And yeah, I think it's these are people who have shown that they can do the work elsewhere. So I think there's one place to point. And it's the direction. And I think, obviously, Hollywood worked that out too, given that they've never invited Mr. Miller back to direct by himself ever again. So that's number 2. And then number 3, I called this toxic machismo, and it comes down to the script. It's hard to imagine that the script is not written as a spoof. It has a sophomoric attitude to sexuality, it has exaggerated machismo, it has cliche after cliche after cliche. It is filled with terrible, hackneyed dialogue, with people being very intent about nothing at all. It's packed with schoolboy humour. There's an entire segment about, the spirit's pants fell down! Because nothing sells your, grim and gritty crime fighter like, a whole sequence of him hanging by his pants, and then it's filled with cringingly awful hormonal attitudes to women. They are there to be ogled, basically. It's just mesmerizingly terrible on every front. It is a dreadful, dreadful script, dreadfully directed. And in the final analysis, as a film, The Spirit is one of multiple examples of just how much can go wrong when an auteur is given free rein to create their own cinematic vision. This is far from the only time this has happened. We will be visiting several other movies that go off the rails in a major way because the creator, the auteur, the visionary was left to do their own thing and given far too much money to do it. And a bad movie ensued. Some of those bad movies will be fun, like I find this one to be. Some of them will not. So we have that to look forward to. So yeah, that's The Spirit. It's terrible. It's a great get together with a bunch of friends and yell abuse at the movie kind of experience. It is not a movie to just sit and watch and actually find anything good about, in my opinion. So, what are we talking about next time? We're going to go a little bit different. We're going to talk about the 1962 Soviet science fiction film Planeta Burr, and I'm sure I have mangled that pronunciation. But yeah, we're going to talk about that movie, or more specifically, the two different American adaptations that were made from it, one in 1965, one in 1968. So that's next time. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this one, and yeah, catch you for Planeta Burr.